Welcome to part 8 of this Python course, which deals with functions in Python, or more specifically, writing your own user-defined function. We've already used a lot of built-in functions. So to give you some examples, we've used max, we've used sum, we've used print. All of those are examples of functions. They have been created by somebody else and they reside already inside the Python module. Now, to create your own function, there are a few things we have to do. Firstly, we are going to start with the DEF notation and a name. DEF is short for define, and it tells Python that this is the start of a function name. The name you give it needs to be specific. It needs to be quite descriptive so that you know briefly what that function actually does. After that, we then specify parameters which are placed inside parentheses. Let me highlight that. What does this do? This allows us to pass arguments to the function, and I'll explain what these words mean just now. The third step, the function definition and parameters then ends with a colon. And this colon indicates the start of the function's contents. In other words, the code inside that function. The fourth step, once we've got the first line of code, which is the definition, the parentheses with the parameters and the colon, is to specify something called a doc string. The doc string is basically the help inside that file. So when you type help and the name of your function, whatever is contained inside the doc string will be displayed to the user. And then lastly, all functions end with a return statement. What this does is it exits the function and it sends a value back to your program that called that function. Okay, so in a nutshell, that is exactly what a function is broken up into. So let's now start by creating a simple function. I'm going to create, let's see, a simple function to display a string ending with a full stop, let's say. So to do this, we're going to start off with the DEF command. DEF, remember, is short for define. And after that, we need to specify the name. So I'm going to call this function, what happened there? Print str. And then inside parentheses, we need to specify a parameter. I'm just going to call my parameter s. Finally, at the end of this first line, we use a colon. When I press enter now, you'll see that because we have a colon, just like previously when we dealt with code structures, the next line of code is indented automatically. The next step is to add a doc string. Remember, we have completed the first 3 steps here. We've got define and the function name, which is def print underscore str. We've then specified a parameter in the parentheses, which is there. And then we've got a colon to indicate the start of the function contents. Now we're going to move on to the doc string. All doc strings start with 3 double inverted commas. So there is my doc string. I've just written a simple line to say that this is a function to display a string ending with a full stop. And then we get to put together the code inside the function to do what you want. So I'm going to use the print and I'm going to say take the parameter, convert it to a string and send it to the print statement. And then I'm going to say end equals a full stop. And finally, we use the return, which will exit out of our function. Right, so there is our function that has been created. When I run that code, nothing happens, but that function is now inside memory in Python, and we can access this function simply by using its name. Now let's start off by showing you how this doc string is used. If I type help print str, it comes back and says, right, the help on function print str in module main. There it is there, print str, function to display a string ending with a full stop. Simple as that. So all it does is display whatever you have placed inside the doc string. To use the function, we can do the following. I can create a greeting, and I'm going to say the greeting equals hello world. And now let's do 2 things. If I say greeting, it's going to come back and say, well, there it is, greeting is hello world, so it says hello world. That is using the built-in print statement in Python. If I now use my function that I've created, which is print str, and I run this code, we can see now that it prints out that string, hello world, and it adds a full stop to it. That's all it's doing. All right, so there's a good example of how you can write your own function and use that function. Now let me just explain to you what is actually happening in this case. When we run this line of code, print str is a function in Python now. Python knows about it because you've created it. So what it does, it says, right, I want to take that variable called greeting and send it to the function. Now, the word greeting, or the variable greeting, is known as an argument. An argument is a value that goes to a function. When the argument gets to the function, it then becomes the parameter. So whatever is inside greeting will be sent up to the function and it becomes the parameter s. So s now contains whatever greeting contained, which in this case was hello world. That parameter then gets used in this line of code. You can see here s is there, it gets converted to a string just to make sure it is string data. and then a full stop is added to it. It gets displayed, and then the return sends that code back to this point here, and it displays that whole thing. All right, so just to get the names right, the value that gets sent to a function is called an argument. When the argument reaches the function, it is now called a parameter. And the parameter is what gets used inside the function to do any calculation that is required. You can use this function as many times as you like. So for example, if I say print str, another string, it comes back and says, right, another string, and it adds a full stop to it. So now that this function has been created, you can use it as many times as you like, over and over again. All right, so that is a brief introduction into functions. So now we're going to start looking at various other parts of a function and how we can create more complex functions. I'm going to start off by looking at something called keyword argument passing. Let's see. That get passed to a function and become the parameter can be named. Okay, so parameters that you create in a function can be named. So for example, I'll say print str, and then I'll say s equals hello. It comes back and says, right, no problem. S is equal to hello, which means it will display the string hello with a full stop added to it. Okay. So this is what's called a named parameter or a named argument. To show you how this works in a little bit more detail, let me create a new function for you. This function I'm going to call print data. This function is going to have two parameters. The first parameter is name and the second parameter is age. And inside, I'm just going to say display user data. Now we're going to put two print statements together. I'm going to say print name and the second line will be print age, and that will also be a value. Finally, I can use the return statement. Right, so let's see how this actually works now. I've run that code, so that function is now inside memory, and we can use that function simply by using the function name. This function has got two parameters, a parameter called name and a parameter called age. So if I now say this, print data, and I send some data to it, Bob and 42, it comes back and says, right, name Bob, age 42. So basically what happens here is that first argument will become the first parameter, and the second argument will become the second parameter. Now, this could cause problems, because if by mistake somebody does this and says print data 42 and Bob, it then comes back with nonsense and says the name is 42 and the age is Bob. Now, obviously, that is incorrect. Right. But by using keyword argument parsing, we can get around this by saying print data, and I can now say age equals 42 and name equals Bob. If we look at this now, even though we've still got it around the wrong way, we have actually named our arguments. The first argument is named age, and the second argument is named as the name. So now when we run this, Python knows exactly what's happening. It says, right, well, even though they're the wrong way around, they have been named. So 42 is the value that goes into age, and name is the value, or Bob is the value that goes into name. All right, so it works out perfectly, and we end up with the display exactly what we expect, which is name Bob, age 42. Right, so named parameters and keyword argument parsing is very important, which allows you to mix up the actual parameters, but still allowing Python to access them properly in the correct order. The next section I want to deal with is something known as default parameter values. Now, basically what this means is that your parameters can be given default values. This means that if you don't include a specific parameter when you call a function, the function will still work because it has a default value for all those arguments. So let's see how we can actually do this. If I create the function that we had previously, which is print data, I can say name is the first parameter and age was the second parameter, but this time I'm going to say age equals 25. And then we can go through the rest of the code just like we previously had. I'm not going to type it out, I'm just going to copy and paste. All right, so there is our function. So it's exactly the same as we had previously, except I've now given one of the parameters a default value. So let's see how we can access this. If I say print data, and then I give it some values, I say Jimmy and 42. Back and says, right, name Jimmy, age 42. But if I now say print data, and I only pass it one value, which is Jimmy. When I run that, right, name Jimmy, age 25. It's used the default value that we passed to age. If we did not have a default value here, we would end up with an error because this function expects two parameters, the name and the age. But we've specified age as having a default value, so if it is left out, the default value is then used inside the function. If we do specify it, then the value we specified is used inside that function. So that is. Now I want to just move on and speak about arguments that are passed by reference. This is a bit of a complicated topic, but it's something that catches out a lot of students if you are not aware of it. And what you need to know is that replacing an object inside a function does not reflect outside the function unless it is explicitly returned. Okay, now to show you how this works, I'm going to do another example, and I'm going to create a definition of a function. I'm going to call it change data, and this is going to be working on a list which I'm going to create. So I'm going to create a function. I've called it change data, and inside that function I'm going to say my list is equal to, I'm going to give it 4 values, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm then going to use the print statement. I'm going to say print and I'm going to print my list, and then finally I'm going to return. Now, there is my function. Now, outside of the function, I'm going to create a variable which I'm going to call my list, and I'm going to give it some values. The values in the list are going to be 2, 4, 6, 8. And then I'm going to print that list out. That list is going to be the first one, so it's going to be 1, my list. And then finally, I'm going to call this function that we've created by saying change data, and I want to change the data contained in my list. Hopefully it should change it to 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to print it out. I'll say print statement, and I want to print out my list. So when I run that code, it comes up with the following. This is exactly what we expect. The first time it prints out my list, it prints out the values of 2, 4, 6, and 8. Then it jumps up to the function. That function then gets some more values or new values for my list of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it displays that list as list number 2. And there it is there. So 2 gets displayed as the values of 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is what we expect. We then return out of the function and we display my list. Now this is where it gets a little bit weird, because one would think that my list now contains 1, 2, 3, and 4. But when we display it outside again, we see that it reverts back to the original values of 2, 4, 6, and 8. Now this is because the argument was passed by reference only, and it only exists inside that function. As soon as you exit from the function, the values that are used inside that function no longer exist. So the original list is again used in this line of code. The next little section deals with variable length arguments. Now, why do we need this? Because sometimes when we create a function, we do not know how many arguments we have. All right. In this case, we can use a variable length argument can be used. Sorry, I should have created that as a text. Right, so to give you an example, if you wanted to create a function which calculates the sum of a whole lot of numbers, but you're unsure of how many numbers you have, you can create a variable length argument to calculate the sum. So for example, if I create a function starting with the def keyword, I'm going to call this function var sum, and now I'm going to give it a variable length argument. A variable length argument starts off with an asterisk. and then you specify the parameter name. In this case, it is numbers. And then we have a colon, and we can do the same as we've done for previous functions. First thing is the docstring. So we can say calculates the sum of the parameters. Now, we do not know how many values are being passed. This asterisk means that it is variable length. We could have 1, we could have 21 different values passed to this function. So because of that, we need to now run through all those values. So I'm going to start off by creating a variable, which I'm going to call total, and I'll give it a value of 0. And then I'm going to create a loop structure, a for loop. So for I in numbers, I'm going to say total plus equals I. Once the loop structure is ended, we can then return the total value that we had. And run that, and that function is now in memory and we have access to it. So if I now say var sum and I give it some values, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I run that, it comes back as 15. What has happened? The values of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 have been sent up to our function and go into our variable length numbers list. If I type var sum and I give it some new values, 2, 3, and 4 only, it comes back and says it's 9. And you can see now, first I gave it 5 values, this time I only gave it 3 values, but it still comes back with the correct result. So the first example I want to do with you is let's create a function to calculate the volume of a cylinder. To create the volume of a cylinder, we start off with the define function, and then we give the function a name. Remember, I told you that when you create a function and give it a name, the name should be meaningful. So I'm going to create a function called volume of cylinder. Now, to calculate the volume of a cylinder, we need 2 parameters, the radius and the height. We create a docstring string has been created. We can then perform the calculation. Now, to calculate the volume of a cylinder, we need pi. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say from math import pi so that we can use it, and then I'm going to say return, and in parentheses we can specify the calculation, which is pi times radius squared times the height. There is our function definition that has been created. To use it, just like we've done previously, we can say print the name of the function, which is cylinder, and we specify the values. We specify a value for radius, let's say 13.5, and the height, let's give it a value of 32, and it comes back and tells us that the volume is equal to 18,321.768. RAD equals float input into the radius. Height is equal to float input into the height, and then I'm going to say print volume equals, format that to 4 decimal places, and now we access the function which is called vol of cylinder, and we give it the 2 arguments. The first argument is RAD, and the second argument I created is HEI. So when I run that code, because the function is already created, you can see how easy the actual program has become. So if I run that now, it comes back and says, right, enter the radius. Well, the radius is 13.5. Enter the height. I'll give it the same values we used previously, 32. And it then comes back and says the volume equals 18,321.7684. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more content on the same series.